is Lisa Butterworth, and I am here with Colette Dalton for the Mormon Sex Info podcast. Welcome, Colette.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm happy to be here.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Colette. I am in the suburbs of Salt Lake City. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I work for Cemetery Solutions along with Lisa, work a lot with faith transitions, faith journeys, religious trauma, sex therapy, sexuality. I'm originally from California, one of 4 kids. In my free time, I go to Pilates studio here in Salt Lake, enjoy spending time with friends, and I'm gay. So, and I think that last piece is what we'll be mainly talking about today.
Yeah. Love it. I did not know you were one of 4 kids. I feel like that was new information for me.
Yeah, I have an older brother, and everyone's in the area now. My family kept being like, when are you moving to Salt Lake? And I'm like, never. And then joke's on me, here I am. So an older brother and his wife, they just had twins that are 5 months old. And then my sister and her husband just had a 3-month-old baby. And then my youngest sister is the other single one with me.
Awesome. So how is it moving back to Salt Lake while being gay? That's got to be something, if you want to talk about it. If not, we can go on to whatever you want.
We definitely can. And I think, every person's journey is a little bit unique. And mine's unique in the fact that when I moved back to Salt Lake, I didn't even think I was gay. I think some people do realize their queerness when they're younger. I definitely didn't. I guess my story along those lines, I can start, when I was younger, I grew up super Mormon, went on dates with guys here, during high school. Once I was 16, I dated a guy for like 6 months my senior year of high school. I went to BYU for my bachelor's and master's degrees and went on plenty of dates, though they were all either I asked pretty much or were blind dates. Very rare that a guy would ask me. After grad school, I moved to Boise, and somehow I didn't meet you, Lisa, until after working for Cemetery. Should have been friends back then.
Tragedy. I would have loved to have known you when you were in Boise.
Oh, I was a very different person back then, though, but that would have been fun. So I moved to Boise, had never been there before my job interview. I got a job working for DI with the church, was working up there, moved in with a woman I didn't really know. I had called all the singles wards bishops, asked for their least society presence number, and asked if they knew of any girls looking for roommates because I was new to the area and I wasn't sure if I wanted to get my own apartment when I still wanted to hopefully have a social life and get to know people. So I moved in with this woman. Took a while for us to figure each other out, but then we became really good friends. And then we started dating, which was odd. All my experiences told me I was straight my whole life. And then suddenly I'm in this relationship with a woman and it feels really good. Granted, it also felt bad because it was complicated by the fact that I was working for the church and we were both still trying to be Mormon. So that was hard. But, this whole time, like, this is just a fluke. I'm straight. It's just her. She eventually moved out because we just kept doing this back and forth. That just wasn't working for us. We both were still trying to be Mormon, and that was just too much for us. So she moved out, we stayed friends. And then, I continue on in my life, not really going on dates, but open to it with guys. And then I moved down to Salt Lake for this job I got, another job with the church. I was excited to be closer to my friend, my old roommate, because she was in the Salt Lake area at that time. And then she told me she started dating a woman. And I was very confused because I thought, like me, she was straight except for me. I was straight except for her. And now here she is dating another woman. So my journey kind of does dealing with my sexuality, even though it started in Boise, it did become more apparent once I was moving to Salt Lake when I was suddenly facing, wait, if she's not straight, what does that mean for me? So that's the background of the story. I don't know if you have any questions about that.
Nope. I think it's definitely, not the usual narrative, right? That we get the LGBTQIA or whatever narrative. But I do find that that's a fairly common narrative that I hear in my practice. That like, oh, I didn't know, right?
Yeah. And I think some people are really confused because it's like, how could you not know? But again, this is my personal experience. So I too have seen it play out with clients. I feel like for some women in particular, they may not know until later or recognize it until later because in my mind, what I internalized with the church is you're not supposed to be a sexual being until you're married to a man. And so I never really looked at my sexuality, never looked at the sexual side of my life. And then I started to and realized, hey, like maybe I'm not straight. And I have seen that happen with women, that maybe they don't realize they're not straight until they already are in a marriage to a man, or maybe just getting older, and I don't know. But I have seen it. Each story is unique, but I have seen some similar type stories, and I'm grateful I figured this out before I married a guy, because I've seen some really hard situations for some people in that way.
Yeah. And I mean, I think there's also a narrative of, even if you are not supposed to be a sexual being until you're married to a man, in a lot of families and a lot of, like the women aren't really having good sexual relationships with their husbands. And so women will be like, well, I mean, I guess a lot of women think sex is disappointing, or, like there's all of that. And so, like there's no kind of context necessarily for what a healthy, connected sexual relationship is supposed to feel like.
Right. I've talked to a few different people and friends, and sometimes they're like, well, don't all women think other women are attractive? Or like I had someone, who would ask friends, be like, well, like if you had to marry a woman, who would you marry? Like if guys were off the table, and sometimes her friends would be like, what are you talking about? And she's like, no, doesn't everyone think about marrying a woman sometime? Like, why would you marry a guy? Not even making the connection that, oh, maybe I'm not straight. Because I think sometimes it's more socially acceptable to be physically close with female friends. And so you don't realize that, oh, maybe this is something else.
Exactly.
Yes, I didn't realize until I was in my later 20s, I'm like, oh, maybe this actually is a thing. Maybe it wasn't just her. And I started making friends with some other queer individuals because I was really confused and I felt alone. My best friend wasn't really talking to me anymore because she was dating this other woman, and I needed friends. And so I made some connections through North Star originally, and then through Encircle, which is an LGBTQ resource center, and then through Affirmation. And those friends started, asking me questions I had never really fully asked myself before about what is attractive to me, what isn't, where do I see my life, what do I want to do? And it was really hard to wrestle with growing up in Mormonism, working for the church still at the time, and trying to figure out how does this fit? And, sometimes, most of the time, still dealing with some internalized homophobia too. When you grow up in such a heteronormative society, I think that's always there and kind of in the back of your mind. Thank goodness for good friends and good therapists working through that. I'm not sure what else to say specifically. It's definitely been a journey, and it was hard. I've dealt with depression since middle school, and I don't think it was ever as bad as it was as when I was wrestling with my sexuality. Yeah. Talking to my therapist now, she's like, yeah, there were times I was scared I was going to lose you. And I don't think I recognized how bad it was until I was out of it, because that was my normal. That's where my headspace was. This is life, and this is how it's going. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that, I think we've talked about this before, but it seems like a lot of my clients, when they sort of have this kind of older awakening, one of the questions that kind of comes up over and over again, because it's kind of a high stakes question, is, am I really gay? Right?
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder, because I'll ask them, well, what is it that, like, if you were really gay, like, what would that mean? Because it seems like that's something that if I could have the answer, like, definitively, well, then that there's some meaning behind that. And anyway.
Yeah, that's definitely something I had to wrestle with. And sometimes that question still comes up in my mind. I don't fit a lot of lesbian stereotypes. And looking back, sometimes people, when they realize they're gay, they look back at their childhood and they're like, oh, so much more makes sense now. And I haven't really had those experiences. but I know I'm gay. Like, I am romantically oriented towards women. If I were to get into the weeds of things, I'd probably say I'm demisexual homoromantic. I'm not sexually attracted to someone until there's an emotional connection, but that emotional romantic connection happens with women. So it's just easier to say I'm gay or queer or lesbian than all those in the weeds things. But I just know it seems to fit better. And that is hard to wrestle with growing up in a conservative religion, when you're told man and woman must be married in a heterosexual relationship, and that's the only acceptable thing. Because then you kind of look and it's like, well, where do I fit then? Like, I don't think I chose this. Some people might, but for me, it does feel like it's ingrained. And what does that mean? If I was created by a higher power as a gay individual, what does that mean for me? And that's tough when the narrative is, oh, you don't fit, or, oh, don't worry about it, it'll be figured out in the next life. And sometimes that rhetoric, I think, adds to suicidality, because, well, if it'll all be worked out in the next life, like, why am I here?
Right.
That was kind of a tough one. And I don't know what it all means for me. All I know is that I'm okay with where I'm at right now. I'm happy being alive. I look towards the future and I don't see myself celibate forever or married to a guy, but I don't know what it all means and how it's going to work out. So, yeah.
Yeah, neither do any of us really, right?
True. We like to think we have control and know how it's working or not working, but we don't.
But I think especially like when we are claiming an identity that is very specifically kind of going against the identity we were given, right? Like, especially in Mormonism, we're given some very clear identities. Like, oh, here's your identity, here's your role, here's your purpose, here's your values.
Right.
And, to have some part of you say on this deep, deep level, oh yeah, I thought those were all my values. Oh wait, what? No, not here. Not this one.
Right.
I don't know. I think that am I gay question is like kind of fundamentally asking this question of like, can I choose a role that I wasn't assigned? Am I allowed to do that?
Yeah.
Maybe.
And I think it's just hard to wrestle with and reconcile. For so long, I felt like I had to either cut out the queer side of me or the Mormon side of me. Like, one side of me had to die. So I think that also added to suicidality. It's about like, well, all of me had to die because there wasn't a way to cut off either side. And it just didn't seem reconcilable. And like you said about having to examine your values and beliefs, I vividly remember I was talking to a queer friend and she's like, Colette, do you really believe that if you were to marry a woman, treat her well, live a good life, helping others, do you really believe you'd get to heaven and God would say, so close, but wrong gender? And I was like, yep. And then my immediate reaction was, wait, why do I believe that? And she said, I don't believe that. She also grew up Mormon. She's like, I believe that God wants me to be a good person. And that if I were to marry a woman, treat her well, not abuse her, live a good life, I'd get to heaven. He's like, good life. You did a great job. Doesn't matter who you're married to. But my immediate reaction was like, oh, that can't be right. Because that's what I've been told, that, oh, sorry, so close, like, wrong gender. Doesn't matter how good you were in the rest of your life. This one aspect is enough to disqualify you.
Right.
And that was hard.
Right. And that work is sort of examining something you've been taught your whole life and reassessing, like, wait, where did that belief come from? And is that something that's in line with my personal values?
Right.
Or is it not? And I think that, that's an incredibly painful, difficult thing to wrestle with. And the answer is pretty high stakes.
It can be. I mean, I remember talking to, bless my therapist, so many hard talks and conversations. And, just that inherent fear that, oh, I'm going to go to hell. One day she was like, maybe you will. Like, I think we all come to the point that we just got to accept that, yeah, maybe I'm going to hell. And I was like, wait, what? But I was living in hell with what I was going through. It was not sustainable. And it's so tricky having to separate out and figure out, who am I? What do I believe? What can I do? What can be sustainable for me to actually want to live? And I eventually came to the conclusion that, I think God would rather that I'm alive and happy and acting on my queerness, to use that phrase, than following every black and white rule in the church and wanting to be dead constantly. And that's kind of where I was. Yeah. And so I had to come to that conclusion, and maybe I did choose wrong, but for right now, I'm very happy with where I'm at, and I'm happy to be alive. Absolutely. And I think that's ultimately a really good thing.
I don't even subscribe to I know this can make certain people crazy, but I think the whole idea of a right and wrong, it is in some ways against my values, in the sense that, like, anytime I set myself up as being right and someone else is being wrong, I'm creating a distance. Like, I'm creating a judgment of them.
Yeah, right.
I'm creating a distance between me and them.
Right.
And, like, my values, my values say that, like, connection and kindness and love are the most important things. And so I can't really, I can definitely make a choice about behaviors being right and wrong, but I don't, and by behaviors being right and wrong, I don't even mean right and wrong so much as, like, behaviors that will lead to more connection and love.
Yes.
Right? Versus behaviors that will lead to disconnection and loneliness and isolation. And the truth is like, getting into that right and wrong mindset, it's always going to put us into isolation and distance.
Yes. And I think that's one reason it's really hard in the church, is because some people do make the automatic judgments.
Right.
And one thing that really doesn't make sense to me is seeing how much the church says it values families, but then families kicking out their queer loved ones.
Right.
Or drawing a line saying, we love you, but. Why is there a but after I love you? Right? Of people saying, we love you, but your partner's not welcome to come to family gatherings. I love you, but I can't condone this by coming to your wedding. Why? Like, why do we feel like we need to judge that right versus wrong? Why can't we just choose love?
Yeah.
And that, I think, causes a lot of distress and hurt and pain in the queer community, when there is that fear that my family is going to choose the church over me, or they have chosen the church over me.
Yeah, for sure.
Which I think is so antithetical to the gospel of love and inclusion. It shouldn't be I love you, but. That should never be a phrase in anyone's vocabulary.
Yeah, it's really rough. And ultimately, like, those I love you, but behaviors lead to so much pain and hurt and disconnection. Like, it doesn't create, for lack of a better word, celestial connection. No, that's not lack of a better word. That's something I hear all the time with clients who have gone through faith transitions, who will say something like, why would I want to go to the celestial kingdom if they're all there? They're so mean.
Right.
And, like, if celestial connection is our, organizing principle, with I really feel like it is. Well, then we have to create that. Like, we have to make a place where people actually want to be. And a place of judgment is not that place. A place where people feel like they're less than, they're not welcome, they're not good enough. That's not going to be the place that people actually want to be.
Yeah. Just the idea of, why are we excluding anyone? Like, why can't we build a bigger table and bring more chairs instead of just letting people be out in the cold, right?
Yeah. I think it really does come down to fear.
It does.
Yeah.
In so many ways.
Like, it's scary to let go of judgment. It feels safer there.
It does. It does.
But it is also lonely there.
It is. And we need human connection is just so vital. And that's what's been so helpful to me is just having the connection. And I think many people in the queer community talk about chosen family. And I think that's so important because sometimes queer people's biological families do reject them. Yeah. And so having their chosen families of extended family members or friends or people in the community that they know aren't going to judge them, that they can connect to and be loved is so important. And honestly, connection was huge for me in realizing I'm okay. Like as I hang out with my queer friends, I'm not judging them. I don't think that they're less than for being gay. It's an integral part of who they are and I love them. So I love their queerness. So why am I any different? That connection was huge.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, also I think being able to tell your story like this, right? Like I have so many clients who, like you, were maybe older when they awakened to the fact that they were gay or bi or even, you know, maybe asexual, or there's so many different possibilities. And having the opportunity to tell your story and hearing other people's stories, I think it's absolutely vital.
Well, yeah, shame thrives in silence, right? And I'm grateful that I'm now in a place where I can feel like I can share my story, because you're right. I think hiding that, being silent about it just drives more shame. And now I'm in a place where I can share it and I want to help spread the light, help people realize you're not alone. If you're ready to share your story, we want to hear it. If you're not, you know, sometimes it is a matter of safety. It's not safe to be out or tell your story. But for me, it's been very healing to share and connect. And so I'm grateful I'm in a place that I can do that now. And especially be working at Cemetery where, you know, I'm able to be, I don't want to say more myself, but essentially, because, you know, working for the church, I couldn't bring that part of me to work. I could not mention it. And now when I have a queer client, I can be like, I get it. you know, you're careful about self-disclosure as a therapist, but it's nice to be able to bring my whole self to work.
Right.
So that's been really good.
I mean, if you're comfortable with it, talk a little bit about what it was like and how you did the work of finding the safe people, because I feel like in the early stages of this process, it's important that you find people who do feel safe. And so what, you know, like, what does that look like?
Well, for me, one thing that was helpful was just watching and listening to people. I don't think people always recognize how aware queer people can be in tuning into safe and unsafe language. I mean, if someone said, oh, that's so gay in a derogatory way, oh, automatically unsafe. And they don't even realize it, right? But people who aren't afraid to talk about LGBTQ issues, who stand up when it's maybe not super popular. You know, that's how I realized one of my sisters, I came out to her first among family because she had said kind things towards the LGBTQ community before and talked about how she's like, that must be really hard because like, this is what the church teaches. And I don't know how they deal with that. That must be difficult. And so just the fact that she had been thinking about these issues, that made her a safe person for me to come out to. You know, the people who had made derogatory comments, even in passing, not as safe, right? People who just, I think, I picked up on them having a lot of black and white thinking in general, probably not as safe. But for me, it was very helpful to find other queer people, not saying that all queer people are safe, you know, everyone has their issues. But it was very healing for me to find queer friends who got it and that could hold space for me and my story. That's where I found a lot of that safe space and connection.
Absolutely. You know, and going on that theme, like, I think that, you know, like, and what safe means to any person really depends on where they are in their journey, right? Like,
for sure.
Early on in your journey, maybe some queer people, if you would have told them like, no, I really want to be Mormon, right? Like, that might not have been safe with them, you know, just because sometimes like where you're at can spark other people's trauma or right. And so it is something to be careful with, because one of the things I will often tell clients is like, well, as you're thinking about who it is you want to tell, really think about things that they've, you know, said to you before, like you said, anticipate what their likely reaction is. And especially if you're going to tell someone who you're not sure what their reaction is or if it'll be supportive, try not to tell anybody like that in a moment when you're hoping that their reaction will bring you healing.
Yes, that was huge. One of my first times going to a support group at Encircle, someone made a very similar comment saying she decided to not come out to anyone unless like she was in a good enough place that her well-being wasn't going to depend on their reaction. And I'm like, that is really smart. And so when I was first coming out, I was very careful because I was still in a space where I was so vulnerable that if someone reacted poorly, I would not have done well. But then as I got more secure in myself, it became easier to tell people and not be as impacted by how they reacted, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I mean, it seems like common sense, but it isn't, because often, I mean, it can be, but it also sometimes isn't, because maybe there is someone in your life you've been able to tell most anything to, and maybe this particular thing, and maybe they've been healing in the past, or you know, it's a tricky situation.
Yes, the same person may be safe in one situation and not in another, and that can be really exhausting, honestly, to judge sometimes on, is this going to work? Is this not? And I'm glad I'm in a better place now where I don't have to do that constant dance, because I'm more secure in myself than I was back then, because it's tiring.
Exhausting. Yeah. And then, you know, I'm sure that because, you know, you've been on this journey for a while, that you have worked up to maybe telling some people in your life, or that maybe it wasn't as safe, and, you know, like, what was the prep work like for that, or how did you, you know, like get yourself ready, or?
Yeah, good question. I think for me, it was just a lot of, I feel okay in myself. And so even if they do react poorly, I know that I'm good with where I'm at. And so their judgment isn't as important as that. And also, you know, I'd often create an after plan of who I would tell, who I could go to after I came out to someone I wasn't sure about. So I'd have a safe person I could talk through whatever happened with.
Right.
And so both those things I think were helpful for me.
That's a great idea. Just having that like backup plan for like, okay, if this goes poorly, who am I going to call, and you know, have them walk me through it. Because I mean, I find this even as a therapist, that like I will think, okay, I'm good in myself. I'm a strong person with lots of emotional intelligence or something. But hard conversations are hard regardless.
They are.
And you know, like you gotta have people in your corner. I think that sometimes we get in this place where, you know, we think, I mean, this is kind of an American ideal of like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and rely on yourself and do your own work, and you know, like so many self-help books that are like, you know, and there is something to that. Like there is something to this idea of like, I got to do my own work.
Right.
And as far as this goes, that's true. That's absolutely true. But we're just not solitary creatures.
No, human beings are hardwired for connection. That's a Brene Brown quote or something very close to that.
Right.
Or her words. And that just resonates with me so much. And I tell clients that a lot, that you aren't designed to be solitary creatures. Like, yes, independence is important to an extent, but really what we're shooting for is interdependent, that you are an individual that can stand on their own, but that can also connect with and help and be helped by others. Because ultra independence, I've heard said, is a trauma response. And I've definitely seen that to an extent. And so shooting for that connection piece as well. Yes, doing your own work, but also connecting, because human beings aren't solitary creatures.
And what, I mean, like, how did you deal with like when you're in the depths of despair and you're calling your friends saying like, oh, such a thing to me, and and we've all been there on different, on different days, different times in our life. Yep. Like how did you cope with, like continuing to connect even though you're feeling like, and bringing some balance into that connection, and like what were your tools for, balancing that out so that.
That's a great question that I'm not sure I have a great answer to. It's sometimes hard for me to think back to those really, really dark times because they were so dark and hard. I think one thing that helped was having planned meetups. Like I was going to the support group at Encircle every week. Mm-hmm. And so knowing I had that time to check in with friends and see people, even if I didn't do anything else, I had that. And so I think that can be helpful, having a scheduled time, because I'll be honest, when I'm not in a great headspace, I do struggle to reach out. I do tend to isolate because I have this intense fear of rejection, right? And so that's hard to want to reach out when I feel vulnerable and alone already. And so I think that was helpful, just already have that built-in space of this is on my calendar and I will see people in a social setting. And building a few close relationships where if I did feel up to it, I could reach out and know I wouldn't be rejected. I'm not someone that really is good at initiating things. Like I'll go along with plans, but I'm bad at initiating. So that was what was helpful for me, was to already have plans initiated that I could go along to and have that connection. And maybe I wouldn't always open up because, again, fear of rejection, right? But I think just being around people instead of staying home and isolating, which is really tempting to do when you're depressed, forcing myself to get out of the house and go be around people in a social setting was what helped a lot.
Yeah. Well, thank goodness for support groups, man.
Thank goodness. It's so important. I know that's one reason Cemetery, we're trying to do a few more support groups, just because knowing you're not alone, I think, is an important part of healing.
Yeah.
And so realizing other people get it. You're not alone. There are people you can turn to. I love that we're adding more support groups for those reasons.
And, I think if you're not ready to go to a support group, I mean, like anything, like softball or
for sure.
Or, like a pottery class, or, like just something where, like you people are expecting you and they'll notice if you're gone, and, like.
Yeah, I know that brings up, I forgot, I joined a community ed watercolor class during one of my dark times. So, I was forced out of the house on Monday nights to go do that. And even though I didn't know anyone else in the class, like I'd paid my money and I want my money's worth, so I'm going.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, there's different meetup groups. I know some people find success in that. Book clubs. There's so many different events in the community that you can find your people. If you have an interest in something, there's probably other people who would love to do that thing with you. But it can be hard to put yourself out there to find it. So I'm grateful that I already had kind of the built-in, and I'm glad I went to that group and it worked for me because I needed that connection.
Absolutely. Well, is there anything else about your story that you would like to share, or any advice that you have for anybody else who's thinking about, like exploring the possibility of, like coming out or questioning their sexuality, or, anything like that?
I think advice I'd have is know you're not alone. Reach out. Hopefully you have a good therapist or coach. Like that can make a big difference. We here at Cemetery get it. And there are lots of competent providers out there that can help you navigate and won't do conversion therapy or even conversion therapy light on you. But also realize like you're not alone, but also your story is unique. You don't need to compare your story to others. Don't compare your story to mine. I'm not better or worse, not good or bad. It's just my story is my story. Your story is your story. And figure out what you need to be able to move forward in a healthy way. And generally that does include some sort of support. So I hope that you can find and turn to people that can help you along that path.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Colette, for this interview and for being so open and vulnerable and such a beautiful human being in general.
You're so sweet. I'm so glad I've gotten to know you. I'm very happy to share my story, and hopefully we can talk more about some queer stuff in the future.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, and think about donating to the Mormon Sex Info podcast. See you later.
We took the long road home, turned minutes into miles, and as the evening traveled on, the sunset bathed your smile. We stopped beneath the desert stars, wrapped in each other's arms. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth.
A trail with tears, pain and sorrow too.
But through every storm we traveled on, like lovers do. And if sometimes we fell apart, we always came back home. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth. Some people say love is blind and forever is too long. But I see your eyes in every sunrise. Can't imagine life alone. Let's take the long road on together until we're gone. Want you by my side till the day I die and into the beyond. It's as simple as our love is. That's how I wanna go, all wrapped up in the arms of our extraordinary. It's nothing